So is this going to be a show?
You may hear other people in the background. We had a very interesting night last night with Kerry Cassidy. Certain individuals phoned and it caused I'm going to just shut this off. Certain individuals phoned and we lost the feed with Kerry. So what I did was I managed to phone the number. It's an 0204 number, which is a new batch of telephone numbers allocated by the Ofcom people here in the UK to London, and basically means anybody can buy them and they can do what they want with them. And when I phoned them back, basically Kerry's Zoom just basically froze and disappeared. So the thing was that when I phoned afterwards the number, it was a very articulate and very well educated, very nice, almost English American accent from a very nice lady on an answering machine talking about a removals company. Now, what do you think a removals company would mean? They remove things?
They remove things, yeah. And I mean, that sounds kind of suspicious, but I mean, the whole accent and the whole thing itself sounds suspicious to me before this interview, yeah.
So
during the Cassidy interview,
we managed to get Kerry back on. It was about her Substack. So anyway, it's hopefully we'll maintain a transmission. You're looking very well. Which part of the States are you in?
I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, yeah. You're just around the corner from the conference.
Yes. And I helped set that up in the beginning.
That's good. Well, I think that's great. Now, there's another friend of mine here from Cornwall, and he lives south of St Mawgan in a place called Zenner. Would you be familiar with Zenner?
Yes.
Well, there were a lot of people in Zenner, like Aldous Huxley, some guy called, I can't just quite remember, all of the people that you would think that would be involved with the Nazis, the pre-Nazis in the 20s and 30s, D.H. Lawrence, the guy who wrote Two Women, I think, and it was a whole genre of people. And what they were doing was D.H. Lawrence in World War One had been thrown out of London, and he was having it off with the direct cousin or sister of the Red Baron. So while he was shooting down British aircraft, she was hanging about in Zenner in Cornwall, and a whole pile of things were going on there. Aleister Crowley, all sorts of people like that. And this also involves a Montauk project. And this is happening in an area just south of that Air Force base that you were in. Now, I understand from talking to a couple of other people who were there at different times that some buildings were knocked down and a new type of Navy-type communications facility was built. So it's otherwise nearby, or otherwise known as Britain's spaceport. And Virgin Atlantic or Virgin Space, they had their big 747 there. That didn't work out in terms of the technology, but it is a spaceport, and nowhere more obvious would there be to hide an alien facility at a spaceport. So tell us all about your involvement there and what your background is. And this is the first time on bases that we've touched on this in this era, and it's in little old Blighty, just down the road from here. So take it away, Daryl.
Yes, I joined the Navy in January of '99, and I served 5 years in Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 7. I served in Iraq during the Second Iraq War. And then after that, I re-enlisted, and I was stationed in JMF RAF St Mawgan is what it was called, which meant Joint Maritime Force for the U.S. Navy, and then Royal Air Force.
Now, I have another connection there. Peter Paget. He was brought in some time ago. He wrote a book called The Welsh Triangle, and he claims to have a British spy background. He was brought in to deal with aliens who were accessing the computer systems and the systems at St Mawgan, and it was the main master base to RAF Machrihanish. So they had a connection, those two. Do you know where Machrihanish is?
It's not Machrihanish.
It's the finger of Scotland. There's a sort of a finger. You've got the boot of, but it's a long peninsula which comes down the river, the Clyde estuary, and is very, very close to Northern Ireland. And I think it's Campbelltown is there. It's Machrihanish, and that was connected to St Mawgan, and they did secret stuff. And so that ties in with what you're talking about. But what was going on with Peter Paget was that he was able to deal with the aliens so that the aliens weren't annoyed. The aliens were basically annoyed that they could be heard at the base. Their activities were known. So this is another, and he was involved with the alien activities at Warminster, which is another base not too far away from central Wiltshire, where I am right now. So these are things I'm just introducing to tie in with what you're saying. But this is another thing. The Welsh Triangle was banned by the MOD. He wrote a book about this. It was all banned. The Welsh Triangle involves that part of the sea with where Morgan is and Wales across the Severn Estuary and things. Anyway, that's that. That's the context. Lots of other things connecting, and I'll let you talk.
Yes, and well, I was going to bring up, because you brought up other cities. I know St Ives, the guys who worked in the underground base, because of the Cornish Cliffs, which is the very tip of the peninsula of Cornwall. There's actually underground caverns that were naturally formed from the waves crashing into the Cornish Cliffs, and they can actually take a nuclear sub and just pilot it all the way through these caves, these underground rivers, and they can pop up into the St Mawgan base underneath, like in the caverns below the underground base.
I think a little bit like Loch Ness. That's what the monster is, just a submarine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but in 2004, I was stationed in St Mawgan, and I would say probably the first week I was there, I was told to go, because I worked in the garage. I didn't work in the underground base. I worked in the garage. I was doing, camp maintenance. If somebody broke a window or something, I'd fix it, things like that. And I had to escort some guys from the corporation Siemens into the underground base. And I only had a secret clearance, so I thought that was strange, and it was a top secret base. So I went to the quarterdeck, which is like the lobby of the base. It's like, where you check in, went to a command. If you're going on vacation, you check out, you check in. There's a logbook, there's a petty officer of the watch, everything like that. And yes. So I got to the quarterdeck. I went to escort these three men from Siemens, and there was like a sliding glass door. And you went through the sliding glass door, and there was something that looked like a metal detector. I found out later that it was called a scanner. And the first man from Siemens said, "I'm not going in that bloody thing." So I thought, well, I don't want to go in it either. So he walked around it, and I tried to walk around as well. And there was a British Army guard behind a stainless steel table with a green beret and a rifle over his shoulder. And he said, "No, you walk through." So I looked at it, thought it was just a metal detector, walked through. I had to be escorted by somebody else that had a higher clearance than me to take these people to a pump. They were basically fixing a pump. And sat down, watched them fix a pump, and that was the end of that. And there were white, blue, and red stripe on the ground, like painted on the ground, lines on the ground. And white was secret, and that just went down main halls. Blue was top secret. That went through other doorways. And then red was above top secret, and that went everywhere. And there were certain hallways where it was just black, like no light. So I figured if you walk down there, maybe an automatic light would turn on. And so that was the end of that day. And then on Friday of that week, I had a 0000 to 4 a.m. watch at the quarterdeck. And when I walked in, I saw Mike Aquino, and he was looking through papers on the desk of the quarterdeck. He was a colonel in the Army. He started the Temple of Set. He was a part of something called Presidio, which was Army base in California, where these children claimed that in the daycare center on base. They'd be taken to an underground tunnel, like a basement area. They walk through an underground tunnel and they pop up in Aquino's house. And he was accused of all these kind of, crimes against children and got away with it. And he was on talk shows like Geraldo and Oprah when I was a kid. So I knew him. He has curled up eyebrows. He curls them up like horns. And I saw him and I said, "How you doing this evening, sir?" And he said, "Oh, pretty good." And asked me where I was from. And, I knew who he was, and he kind of creeped me out. And I just said, "I'm going for another round, sir." I was rover watch, which you walk around the base. And he said, "All right, have a good night." And I walked around the base. And
I interviewed Aquino. It is Aquino, yeah. He's passed away now.
Yeah. Yeah, no good. But yes, then the next Friday I had another watch on Friday again, which usually doesn't happen, only if you're like late for the prior watch, because nobody wants to be, on a Friday night, 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. So I had another one. And the petty officer of the watch was there. He was a blonde guy, overweight, had a blonde mustache. And he was looking at the computer monitor, and he pointed at the computer monitor and he said, "What do you think about that?" And it would look like a picture of like a stereotypical gray. It was black and white, and it was just on the computer monitor. And I said, "What, did you get that off the internet?" And he said, "No, look." And next to that sliding glass door, there was like this big window that stopped on the wall that stopped like 6 inches from the ceiling and 6 inches from the floor. And it had like a desk it was like a separate room, had a desk and chairs. And there was like this little gray standing behind this window. And it was like khaki brown. It had the big black eyes, no nose, small mouth. It had 2 folds of skin that went from its tear ducts down to its cheekbones. And he said, "Do you mind if it comes in here?" And I said, "Does it mind if I look at it?" And he said no, and it said no too, but like in my head, like I heard it say no in my head. And it walked out of that room, walked through the sliding glass doors. That same guard was behind him. And he had something that looked like a silver pistol in his hand. And I just got back from Iraq, so I said gun. I thought it was a pistol. And it still kept walking towards me. And I stood up and I said, "Gun, gun, gun." And they all said it's not a gun. And he held it out, to let me see it. And it looked like a pistol to me. I didn't know what it was. And the guard no longer had his rifle on his shoulder. He had it, at the ready, they call it, which it wasn't aimed at me, but he had it in his hand. So I realized like the rifle was for me. So I sat back down. And it was actually a drill. And it went up to this just junky government issued Dell computer. And it took it apart like a machine. Like it didn't have to guide the bit in or anything like that. It was just able to do that. And it was catching all the screws with its other hand. Went to the back, went to the side, slid it off, popped out 2 gigs of RAM, put it on top of the desk. It was short, so I had to reach up, grab 2 more, put them in, slid it back down. And it was able to kind of flick its wrist and almost like set the screws every time between its fingers. And it had long, spindly fingers. Like its palms were very long and its fingers were long. And it had to kind of hold its hands in C shapes when it walked. Otherwise, it would have drug its fingers on the ground. But it had 5 fingers. It didn't have the 3 you always see. It had 5 fingers. And yeah, I put it back together almost as quickly as it took it apart. And then it just kind of stood there and looked at me. And I looked at it. It had no navel, no nipples, no genitals. And I turned my head and it moved its head for me. And I turned the other way and it moved its head for me. And I looked at its hands and it moved its hands back and forth for me. And I got kind of bored with it. And it walked away, and they went back in the underground base, which by the way, that door, it immediately, you make a left and it go to an elevator, and that's how you get an underground base, when you go through that sliding glass door. But yeah, I got bored with it. It walked away, and I actually tried to touch it. Like I said in my head, "Do you mind if I touch you?" Like, because I wanted to, like, this didn't feel real to me, so I wanted to touch it. And petty officer of the watch said, "No, don't touch it." And so I just sat back down. I just kind of looked around and walked away. And I was pinching my thigh. I was sitting down, pinching my thigh when this happened. And he said, "Do you think you're dreaming?" And I said, "No, I want to have a mark on my body in case you wipe my mind. I want to have some sort of a mark." So I was giving myself a blood blister on the thigh. And he said, "Don't worry, you're going to remember this." And he started saying, "You're smart." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, really smart." And I said, "Well, how smart?" Like 140, 150 IQ. And he said more like 190, 195. And I said, "Well, how do you know that?" Well, he pointed at the computer monitor, and there were these color-coded lines. And he said, "See, you're the second smartest guy on base." So it was one above me. Well, I was right below it. There was a gap, and then there was like the rest of the guys. And he started telling me things like, "You smoke," because I smoked at the time. And he said, "But you don't have any clots. That's because you drink," because I drank at the time. And then I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And he said, "You know that scanner you walk through, the thing that looks like a metal detector?" He says it just scans your entire body. It knows everything. It's like a physical every time you walk through it. And it knew your IQ scores and everything else.
It's a bit more than an airport scanner, or do the airport scanners do that?
You could be right. I don't know. They might, it might be some sort of ET tech, but they called that, they just call it a scanner, and that's exactly what it looked like. It had a little hump that had the black and yellow caution tape on the ground to step over it. And
it's interesting at Paddington Railway Station, that's the railway station for the Great Western Railway. They have those lines that you talk about. So it's interesting. Maybe there are lines which go to places in that railway where, who knows?
It could be, yeah, it could be. And I go on later on about 5G. I found that out about this space too, and yeah, he started asking me questions like, "Do you have any hobbies?" And I said, "I used to play classical guitar." And he said, "Well, they'll like that." He said, "You'll be an officer, so you'll have plenty of time to practice." And I said, "What do you mean they?" And he goes, "Well, there's Germans up there." And I said, "Up where?" He said, "In the moon and beyond." And he really didn't call it space. He just said up there. And he was
some people use the term upstairs.
It could be, like, I don't remember that term, but yeah, but he just said up there. It's up there. That's all he called it. And when I said, "You mean space?" he said, "It's kind of like that." Like, he didn't really call it space. And yeah, but he didn't seem like he knew a lot. He seemed like he primarily just went to the moon. He said there's like portals in the underground base, like looking glass portals, where you can just walk through a portal and you go immediately to the moon. And he said, "Yeah," he's like, I was in the moon last night." Like, he went to the moon all the time, it sounded like. And he said there were other things, and I said, "What are they?" He said, "We don't know. All we know is that they've been here as long as us. We got into a war with them, but we got outside help. And one of the agreements is they had to stay underground, and because they lost the war, and they've been infiltrating like our educational and our religious systems ever since, and things like that." And but like I said, he was kind of a low level. I don't know if he knew what he was talking about. I found out later from others that he really didn't know what he was talking about. That was the things he was telling me. And yeah, so that was over for that day. And I woke up the next day and I saw the bruise on my leg, and I thought, "Oh, geez, it's real." Because, it was just something so unbelievable that I couldn't really wrap my head around it. I really wasn't into things like that. I worked construction, and
But had you had mind wipes before, which is why you wanted to make sure this time it was going to stick?
maybe I had. I haven't a clue. And yeah, he even asked like why I was a CB, and during the interview, this was almost like an interview, and he was asking me, "Do you think you could work around something like that?" I think that's what the point of it was, to see my reaction. Would I run away? Would I attack it? And I said, "I guess." And he said, "Why are you a CB?" Because it was construction, and I had a 195 IQ. And I said, "I got a marijuana paraphernalia charge when I was 19. So all I could do was construction or be a cook." And I went into construction instead. So I woke up the next day. I had the bruise on my leg. Immediately, one of the guys from the barracks came up to me and said, "What do you think?" And I asked him, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Long, spindly fingers, big black eyes, kind of creepy looking." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And I even kind of forgot. And he said, "Well, some people do." And he said, "Do you know who the smartest person on base is?" And I said, "No." And he says, "It's the XO, the executive officer, who is the second in command of the base." And yeah, so I was, Monday happened, and the XO came to the garage where I worked. And he said, "Can I talk to you, Petty Officer James?" And I said, "Sure." And we were walking at first. It was small talk. How do you like England? Things like that. And then when we got far enough away, he said, "Pretty amazing, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." You know, talking about the drone I saw, whatever it was, the drone. And he started telling me about something called Project. He said, "Have you ever heard of Project Solar Warden?" And I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, have you ever heard of the United States Navy Secret Space Program?" And I said, "No, but I think I could figure that one out." And he said, "We have this program. It's called the 20-year and back. You do 20 years. After you're done with your tour, we send you back in time 20 years, age regress you 20 years, wipe your memory, and you wake up in bed like nothing happened." And I said, you know, I could believe in going back in time, and I could believe in, you know, wiping mind. But there's something about age regression I found difficult to believe. And he said, "After what you saw, you find that difficult to believe." I said, "Well, touche, sir, but yes." And he said, "Well, it's true." He really wasn't interested in convincing me any further. And he told me about Gary McKinnon, who hacked in NASA. And
What was his effect? He didn't just get a couple of passwords or whatever, you know, like password is password. He seems to have really had a really big effect.
oh, on me personally?
Well, I mean, why would they mention him if he wasn't that special?
Oh, Gary McKinnon.
Yeah, McKinnon, I think, yeah.
Gary McKinnon. I'm sorry. Yeah, Gary McKinnon. Well, he was just telling me, you know, he got access to files of extraterrestrial officers with ranks and social security numbers. He pictures of cigar-shaped craft over the moon, and he said it's all real. He said all of it's real. And he said the only reason they didn't arrest him, I heard it was because he was autistic, but he said it was because he would have been able to call witnesses in a court of law, and it would have blew the whole lid off Solar Warden. And it was the Iraq War was happening, so they just kind of swept it under the rug. It was just on the news for a couple of days, and it was gone.
Well, I think he only recently was pardoned. And I don't know if it was Trump. It was one of the last things Trump did, that he was pardoned, because I think they were saying that they wanted this guy, but they wanted to bring him to the States, and then he wouldn't be able to call witnesses or whatever. But I mean, he seems to have had a disturbing effect on talking about this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it had an effect, of course, but they didn't want anyone to know about it. They didn't want it to be on national TV. This was a huge event. They didn't want, anyone to know anything about this.
Is that why his effect was played down?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not show too much concern. But I mean, we're going to bring him over. I mean, there's quite a lot of people were committed to, making sure that didn't happen.
Yes. And he started telling me about, if you volunteer for this, I guarantee you'll make commander and become captain of a 4-kilometer long starship, is what he said. And he said it looked similar to the ships from Battlestar Galactica, is what he told me.
I think that looking at Battlestar Galactica and looking at the puppet TV show Thunderbirds and Fireball XL5, there's a lot of craft there in those children's TV shows which I think maybe have origins in certain underwater or space programs of some kind.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. They call that soft disclosure. He went into that like later when I talked to him later. That they kind of add little bits and pieces of truth, because maybe if someone comes forward about this, they can just say you got that from a television show, things like that. It's a way to kind of deny everything. He told me that that's something common.
It works both ways. We did tell you. We didn't keep it a secret. That's the best way to keep a secret, by telling people.
Uh-huh. Correct. Yeah, correct. Yeah, and that's like a way to get past their, I don't know, a karma or something like that, I guess you would call it. We were telling them the truth. We're letting them know what we're doing, but they're not doing anything about it. That kind of attitude. And he said that, and I thought about it. And I told him, I said, that machine that I walked through, the scanner, it could tell if I had clots in my body. And he said, yes. And I said, well, my dad died of something called a widowmaker when I was 19. which he had a clot in his heart, and it broke off and he died, and there was no warning or anything like that. And I said, if we had technology like that, that would have saved his life. And he went on about population control. We really can't do things like that. And I said, well, there has to be a side that wants to release this to the public. And he said, you mean like a traitor? And I said, no, sir. I said, I mean just the side. There has to be like some sort of side that wants to release it. And he said, well, there is. And I said, well, if you can get me on that side, I'll do it. And shook his hand, saluted him. And as he was walking away, he said, one more thing, Mr. James. And he was calling me Mr. too, the whole conversation, which only like officers call each other Mr. in the U.S. Navy. So he was already kind of referring to me as an officer. He said, one more thing, Mr. James, you're going to be escorted by a reptile, and he's big. And I just I didn't know what he was talking about. Like, I had no idea what he was saying. This didn't occur to me. And so that was a Monday, and I was going to sign up. I was going to join the program on Friday. And we were in the barracks one time playing Halo, and one of the guys said, I joined the secret space program, and I was in the mines of the moon, and there are all these women, and there are these brothels, and they put shock collars on you, and if you had to work in groups, and if somebody in the group didn't work hard enough, they would shock everybody, and your only motivation to work was sex. And he was just telling me all these different things, and I thought maybe that the XO told everybody that, they'd become pilots, and I'd just wind up in mines. So I said the XO himself came up to me and said that I'd become a pilot of a 4-kilometer-long starship. Did he say that to you? And he said, no. He said, I just volunteered. I just worked in the base, and I volunteered. He said, you're going to be up there, man. They're going to take good care of you. And when he was saying this, a feedback loop happened in the room. And a voice came on that said, now hear this, now hear this. You are now in violation of 7 and 8 of the Articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If you do not stop right now, you will face up to 10 years in prison and up to $100,000 in fines. That'll be all. And it went away. And I said, what was? I looked around and I said, is there a speaker in here? Because there was no speaker. And one of the guys said, with their technology, they don't need speakers. And I kept on trying to, talk about it. And they said, we need to stop because they're listening. So we just stopped. And the same person that came up to me and asked me what I thought about the drone, big black eyes, kind of creepy looking, that guy, he said, did you hear that voice? And I said, yes. And he said, those rectangular blocks on the tower by the underground base? And I said, yes. And he said, that's 5G tech. It's something new that they're experimenting on this base with. He said that they could create a microwave beam. They can go into a room, into a house. They can hear everything. They can see everything, and they can talk if they want. And that was news to me. And he kind of described the way it looked. It was just like a monitor, and you had almost like 2 joysticks, almost like a remote control helicopter kind of thing. And then there was another time we were in the barracks playing Halo again on the Xbox and waiting for another game. And one of the guys said, did you see that reptile today? And then another one said, yeah, he was big. And another one said he talked funny. And I was kind of listening to it, but when they said talk, I thought, what? And I said out loud, like, what do you mean? There's reptiles underground that talk to you? And he said, oh, yeah, right. You're new here. Yeah, there's reptiles. They live underground, and they're big, and they talk. And I was still thinking, like, maybe like a monitor lizard or something. And I said, they walk around on all fours, and they talk to you? And he said, no, they walk up on, 2 legs like us. They're bipedal. They have arms. They have legs. And I didn't know what to think of that. I thought they were kind of just messing with me because I was new, and I didn't work in the underground base, but I just kind of blew it off. And then it was Thursday night before I was going to join the program, and I was in the TV room of the barracks. And right across the hall, the guy's door was open, the room right across from the TV room. And it was almost like one of those situations where he wanted me to overhear him. So, he's talking out loud. It seemed like he was speaking to someone else, but he wanted me to overhear him. And he said something like, they're going to take you to a density chamber. You're going to be strapped into a chair. He said, we're 3rd density, and most of the other ETs we work with are 5th density. It's going to push you up artificially.
Explain exactly what that means, because we've got the new age people about 5th density and all that. I mean, What does that actually mean?
He explained it. I got explained more from the XO later on, but he said that the ETs we work with, they're much too fast, they're much too smart. Like according to us, like our density, our reality, our enlightenment, I guess you would say. And it's he said you'll become stronger, faster. Your IQ will go up 200 points, and you'll become more of a collective, is how he put it. But like third density is where we are, and it's kind of like we're put here artificially. So it's kind of like
it's nothing to do with 3D and 4D dimensions. It doesn't have to do with space-time. Is it a space-time density?
Yeah, yes. I myself, like, I'm not extremely familiar with it. Like, I don't do a lot of studying in other people's work. I'm just kind of like, I just kind of traveled whatever this was, like joining this program. And it was explained to me, like, third density is basically like hell. And like, we're one of the last worlds in third density, and we're kept here artificially. Fourth density is like astral plane, spirit world kind of thing. We have the ability to go up one density through, meditation, astral plane travel. We can travel the astral plane. He explained to me if we meditate.
Well, that's what Aquino was doing. He was doing a lot of that.
Yeah, he was doing a lot of that. Yeah, and and then fifth density is more like spiritually and more technologically advanced. And it also kind of like changes the way space is, I guess, if you're on a different plane of reality, in the sense that space is kind of like a cone. It's not shaped like a cone. I'm not saying it is a cone, but we're at the bottom. We're third. So to get from one end of the cone to the other is impossible, pretty much. Now you have fifth density beings, and they're in the middle of the cone. They still need craft, but they can go from one end of the universe to the other. And then you have like ninth density beings, which I was told is the highest we know of. I know other people say there's higher than ninth, but I was told by the XO that even ninth density beings don't know anything higher than ninth. That's what he told me. And they basically just have to step out their door, and they're on the other side of the universe. They're at the very point of the cone. I remember they could do things like they could appear on ships when I was in the program. They didn't need craft or anything like that. They could just appear. And that's about what I know about densities. And I overheard this guy talking about a density chamber. So it was Friday, and I was in my working blues, and I signed a bunch of papers, like probably like enough, like a mortgage, basically, contract. And it was typical. It was like sign here, initial here. I already had X's. He was flipping pages for me. It was the same petty officer of the watch. And I was reading it in the beginning, and it was saying strange things like the consciousness of the first party now belongs to the second party. And as I was reading it, he said, if you read this whole thing, we'll be here all night. Just sign the damn. He said, you're already back there, so just sign the damn papers. Which meant to me like I had already come back or whatever from this program, as far as what I knew about time travel and everything. And I was being age regressed, I guess, already. And I realized I was in a time loop. And it was kind of eerie. But then, I said to myself, I'm doing this for Dad. So I just signed it, sat down. He got on the phone. He said, send him in. I waited, 5 minutes. And he said, all right, go with him. And he pointed up. And there was this huge reptile behind that same window, that same big window. And he was brown. He's probably around 9.5 feet tall. He kind of had to like cower in the room. He was wearing one of those tight blue suits. He had ridges going down his head, almost like mohawks. Gold alligator eyes. His mouth just went straight across and then up. He was so dark brown, it was difficult to make out like the features of his face. Very big, huge muscles, huge shoulder muscles. And I stood up and I yelled out. I said, Jesus Christ, he's not going to eat me, is he? And he said he's much stronger and faster than you. If he wanted to kill and eat you, he would have done it by now. And when I said he's not going to eat me, he sighed like not another one of these guys. Like it was a 9 to 5 to him. And I said, can he read my mind? Because the other one could read my mind. And he said, yes, he could read your mind.
But that seems like they've got a sense of humor.
Maybe. Or maybe they probably, well, the guy said they walked around, the underground base. I found out later that they call them off-world Germans. They're actually a lot of the people who are off-world Germans. They call them Dark Fleet and Nacht Waffen and stuff like that. They're actually kind of raised by these things. So maybe it's a loyalty thing, but they're raised around humans, young children. And so he eventually came out of that room and came.
Sorry, are you saying that the reptilians are raised around the humans, or the humans raised around the reptilians?
The humans, the off-world Germans, I guess, to kind of like acclimatize to working around reptiles all the time. And he eventually walked out of that small room, walked to the quarterdeck, and I was just standing there. And there was a shorter, skinnier guy with him. And I found out later he was an off-world German, but he was dressed up like British Army. And so I got up and I started walking with him. We took the elevator. We're walking in the underground base, and this guard kept on hitting me in the back. The guard was behind me, and the reptile was in front of me. And the guard kept on butt stroking me, like hitting me with his rifle in the back, but between the shoulder blades. And eventually I said, "Please stop doing that. I'm not looking around or anything like that. Please stop hitting me." And he did it again, harder. And I was in the military for 5 years already, and I had dealt with weapons. So I just turned around and I grabbed his rifle and I put my leg behind his and I threw him down to the ground and knocked the wind out of him. And I said, "If you hit me with this thing one more time, I'm going to shove it up your ass sideways." And I heard the reptile say, "Leave us." And the way he talked, it was very deep. Like it was like, "Leave us." It was like almost like the last syllable he had to kind of push out. And this younger kid, he stood up. He looked at me, looked at his weapon, looked at me, looked at his weapon. I held it out by the barrel. He grabbed it, and he just ran away. When I turned around, reptile was like right in front of me, looking down. He was flexing all his muscles. I could see his eyes peering over his chest muscles. And the first thing that came to my mind was, "I'm sorry for what I said before. You're much more civilized than him." And then you really can't, they don't have muscles in their face, so they don't bare their teeth. They don't furrow their brows. Their eyes just get small when they're annoyed with you. And when I said that, his eyes opened up normal, and he turned around and he said, "Follow me." And I was seeing things like there were golf carts off to the side.
There's a whole lot of messages in that what you just said. And I think that's a big deal of a message to get across right now.
Yeah, yes. And I found out later that these kind of reptiles are more like a working / warrior caste. And they're not like the royal caste in the sense of they don't enjoy suffering, really. They might eat someone like a force of nature, like an alligator, but they're not into the loosh and everything like that, like the royal caste would be. They don't enjoy pain and suffering. And I saw bikes leaning on the side of the wall in case somebody had to, jump on a bike and go further into the underground base. And we were going down a gradual hill, it felt like, the whole time. And then eventually there was like a 3-step catwalk, kind of like stairs going up to like a watertight door. It had the wheel on it and everything. And he walked in and I walked in behind him, and I saw something that looked like a gas chamber chair. It was black, it had holes on it, it was had straps on it. It was very big, like it was meant for one of them. I found out later from the XO's first name was Robert. And I found out later from him that we are able to go up 1 density naturally, as I said before, but reptile 4th density beings can't do that. They can't go from 4th to 5th. So they created this density chamber so they could go up into 5th density to kind of compete with the other ETs at 5th density. Because that's kind of like with the center where the movers and shakers are in the universe, like 5th. And so the chair was very wide, very big, and this was reptilian technology. I didn't want to go in. I thought it was a gas chamber. I had an event as a child where they had the DARE program in America. It was Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, and police would come to your school to get you to not do drugs and stop crime. And they wheeled in a gas chamber chair in a trailer in our elementary school. I was like 6, and it really scared me. And I had that memory come back, and I said, "No, I'm not going in this." And I went to run. It grabbed me, threw me in the chair, started strapping me in. I was struggling to get away. I remember it had like its arm over me, and his hand was so big it was able to have the arm of the chair over his hand too. So I had my hand locked down like that, and his nails were black, and they kind of looked like ours in the beginning, but then they came out and they kind of rolled into each other and created like black needles. So like, yeah, he had like these kind of black nails like us, but then they became needles. And I grabbed his thumb and I started pulling it up, and then he headbutted me or hit me. I didn't see what happened. I blacked out for a few seconds. And then when I came to, my right side was in, and I kind of got off the chair. Like I said, it was really high up and really big, so I kind of got off and I was undoing the strap. And he pushed me in again, and I could feel his fingers here and his palm here. And he leaned in, and he made kind of the sound that an alligator makes whenever their mating call, where you can only feel the percussion of the rumble. You can feel it in your chest. And as he got closer, I could eventually hear it. And he said, "Don't make me hit you again." And when he got close, I jammed my thumb in his eye because I was like fighting for my life as far as I was concerned. And he leaned back and he just kind of pushed on my chest until he collapsed my chest and pushed against my heart, and I blacked out. When I came to, I was in the chair. I remember he said something like, "I'm sorry I have to do this to you." And there was a control panel I couldn't see. It was on like the same side of the wall as the door, but I saw his peripheral and I saw him doing something. He left, closed the door, tightened it, and I felt like unbelievable pressure to the point where it got painful. But then it just became almost like a out-of-body experience. It became like, cold weightlessness and then peace. And it kind of felt like that. Then I came to, and I saw a guy who looked like a Gestapo. You know, he had slick back hair with pomade. The sides were shaved. He was wearing like a black trench coat. He didn't have a cover on. And he was kind of gesturing like he was talking to the reptile, but he wasn't speaking. And the reptile's back was towards me, and the reptile kind of doing the same thing. And he looked like sorrowful, like mournful for the reptile. He looked like he had like a face of pity on him. And I slid off the chair. Like I said, it was high up. I remember one of the footrests hit me in the back, and I kind of swayed, and I said, "Can I go to bed now?" That was the first thing that came into my head. And I fell down on my hands and knees, and I saw his boots come in front of me. And he said, "I should have you executed for what you did to my man. Do you hear me?" And then I just fell over and I passed out. And before I passed out, I heard the reptile say, "It doesn't matter. He doesn't remember." Then I came to, and the reptile was holding me like a duffel bag kind of under his arm with my head facing towards the back. And all my weight was on my bladder. And I said, "I have to go to the bathroom." I said, "Put me down so I can pee." And he wasn't listening. And I kind of just passed out and said, "I'm going to pee on you," or something. Because it's like when you go into like the density chamber, you go through almost like a temporary amnesia. It's exhausting. You come in and out of consciousness constantly. It's like a period where, yeah, I don't know. It's just very strange. You're disoriented. You still know how to reason, but you don't remember who you are. You don't remember your past or anything. I saw a bright white light, which I found out later was looking glass that I was passing through a portal. And then he just laid me down on a medical bed. Like a regular medical bed. It had like railings on it, but it was wide, like it could have been made for one of them. It had the big hospital like surgery light with the LEDs all over it that you see nowadays. That was there. And I heard ripping and tearing. And then all of a sudden somebody started putting like stickers on my chest, like heart monitor kind of things, like it was a physical. And I looked over and it was a woman, and it's almost like, the whole ignorance is bliss. It's kind of like I was really out of it. It was almost like I was drunk or loopy. It was strange. Everything was different too. Colors were more vibrant. That's something else about fifth density. You find yourself going back and forth. You can go down your own timeline, is what ETs call it, which is like seeing your own future. And you'll sometimes do that without even realizing it and come back to where you are in the present. So the whole time is an illusion thing. It's more apparent when you're in like a higher density like that. Frequencies, your night vision is improved. Lots of things are improved. And I asked her, "Can I hold your hand?" And she said, "Yeah." And she let me. I said, "You're pretty. Can I hold your hand?" She let me hold her hand. There was another woman there. I could hear her giggling that I was saying this. And I found out later that this woman was an IT computer tech that worked on the base. And I guess she joined the program as well. And she was a nurse, in the moon. That's where it took me. It took me into the moon, the portal. And I passed out. And I woke up the next day. I was by myself in like this big white room. And then she walks in. She had a bag. She set it down on the table. She brought out a smart glass pad, which are like clear pads. It's what the smartphone's based off of, like a clear plexiglass kind of pad. Like holograms are kind of coming out of it. Like she could actually grab it and kind of pull it out. And then it was like a humanoid body, and she was able to spin it around with her finger. She put her hand in it and go like that and look at the heart, look at the circulatory system. She was checking out my brain, all these different things. I lay down on the bed, another bed, and there was like this ball, and it had like lights on it. It looked like little spherical lights, and they were like green and blue and red, and like the lights were kind of shining over top of me. I didn't know what she was doing, but she was going to leave for the day. And I said, don't leave. I said, I'll be here by myself. Where are you going? I don't know anybody. And she said, don't worry, I'll be back tomorrow. And I took her by the hand and I said, I don't know what to do or say. I just don't want you to leave me. And she liked that. So she grabbed my hand and she took me out. And when she took me out, it was almost like we were in like a courtyard of a condominium. It was like, I looked behind me and there were like trains going back and forth. It looked like changing of shift. There were men walking with gray jumpers on, jumpsuits. I saw there was like 5 or 6 stories up, this condo, I guess you would call it. And there were women, some of them holding babies, and they were waving, and the men were waving at them. And there were these 4 lifts, and they had no railings or anything like that, like in the middle of the courtyard, these 4 lifts that were going up and down. And nothing, there was no cables or anything. They were just going up and down. And she grabbed my hand and took me to one of these lifts, and it just went straight up, and it went right to her room. It just pulled up right to her room. And on the sidewalk of this top, we were at the top floor, and on the sidewalk, there was a woman holding her baby. And I said, aren't you afraid you're going to fall down because there's no railing? And she said, oh, no, you can't fall down. And she just stepped out, and there was like this invisible kind of field. And she said, there's one on every floor. And I said, how far does it go? And she said, all the way to the other side of the wall. And she said, the kids play on it. They're not supposed to, but they do. So this woman took me into her room. It was very Spartan. It was just like, there was like a couch area, a coffee table, like a bar kind of kitchen area, you know, a desk off to the side. And there was a hall with like a bathroom and a bedroom. And she took me into the bedroom and we started to kiss. And then she said, wait, what's your name? And I said, I don't remember. And she said, think, everybody remembers their name. And I thought about it and I said, Daryl. And then we started to kiss more and we wound up having sex. And I was on the leaning on the headboard of the bed, and she was falling asleep against my chest. And I woke up, and I was back in England. It was just like that. It was like I remembered these, and the guy even told me, the petty officer of the watch, he said some people remember the first day or two, but nobody remembers more than that. And yeah, I just woke up, and I just kept on saying, like, I was with a woman, like, what happened to me? And I got up out of bed, and my uniform was on a chair in front of my bed, and it was laid out all nice and neat in front of me. You know, like the shirt, the slacks, you know, the tie, and the shoes were tucked up underneath it. And I still had my socks on and my shirt on, and I never sleep with my socks on. And I was thinking, like, what happened to me? And I took my shirt off and I ran my fingers through my hair, and I had burnt stubble in my hair. And I just gotten a haircut, and it looked like somebody shaved my head with just like a number 2 guard or 3 guard, like a kid shaved my head. And then I felt my face, and I had real thick stubble, like somebody just took clippers and like shaved my beard off. And I ran my fingers down my chest, and I had burnt stubble on my chest hair. And I looked at my chest, and I was very toned. I was very like strong. I had a lot of like more muscle than I did before. And I looked at my forearms, and I had more muscle, like bigger forearms. And I got dressed, and I had clay on the tops of my feet, which I didn't understand. And I got dressed, and I went outside, and there was like a guy waiting for me. He was part of the whole Xbox crew that we played video games with. And he said, congratulations, you made it back. I said, what? He said, 20 years is a long time. A lot of people don't make it back. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And so, yeah, that was kind of like my life, and it was very strange. And then I used to drink at the bar on base. There was a bar on base, and there was like 3 or 4 guys that would sit at the bar, and then there was like a bigger guy with a shaved head that sat down next to me a lot watching movies and stuff when I was in the bar. I call him the Goon. I don't remember his name, but I found out later they were all Satanists, and I guess they worked directly with the reptiles in these underground caverns below the actual base. There's actually like caves underneath all these underground bases. And he said, "Hey, it's the king of the Taigetans, man." He goes, "Hey, what's up?" He said, "Aquino, fuck you up." He's and I was like, "What are you talking about, king of the Taigetans?" And he's like, "I don't know. That's what you were calling yourself." He said he had me smashing your toes with a hammer. He said he was torturing you, but I had no like recollection. I didn't know like what he was talking about. And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, some people call them the Pleiadians." He's like, have you ever heard of Billy Meyer?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you should look him up." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I didn't know what he meant. Anyways, like there were other weird things that happened. I remember the one guy who he was kind of like he told me stuff that went on the underground base, and he was the one that asked me about what I thought about the drone. And everybody called him Lando because he liked Star Wars so much, from like Lando Calrissian. And he had all these, I remember, models in his room of like German World War II, like Panzers and Tigers and things like that. And he was his grandfather was from Mexico. And I remember one time, one of the senior chiefs came in. He had a mustache, skinny, glasses, and he started naming off all of these models. Like he just didn't know like Panzer. He was calling them like the P9 138, and he knew like the official names for everything in his room. And I found out later he was an off-world German, and that's why he knew all these things. And he was a senior chief, but he was also an off-world German. And one time the same guy, he walked up to me, the guy named Lando, we called Lando. He said, "Hey, James, have you ever heard of reptiles?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, Johnson believes in that stuff, but I don't." He named off the name, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And the command was kind of getting people who didn't join the program to see if I had memories. They were like posing as if they were my friends, but they were almost like spies to see if I still had memories. And he said that there was this other person, Johnson, told him that there was like a technology where somebody's consciousness could be pulled out of them, but it had to be done before puberty. But the body is mostly sedentary, so they can't do it like when they're 3 or 4, or the bones will get brittle and the body will die. But they have to do it around 9 or 10, like right before puberty. And they can pull the consciousness out, and then another consciousness can kind of go into that body and almost use it like an avatar, like a meat puppet. And he said that's what happened to Aquino. And I said, "Well, what controls Aquino?" And he said, "I don't know." Like he had no idea. And I said, "Well, what happened to the original consciousness?" And he said, "I don't know." And so I heard stories like that. One time we had a 4th of July party on base, and we were cooking hot dogs and hamburgers, and the XO came up to me, and his daughter was there, and he said, "Petty Officer James, I'd like to introduce you to my daughter." And I thought, "Oh, this is strange." And I talked to her, and I asked her where she was from, and I wanted to see if she wanted to go out sometime, and she turned me down. And then he came up to me and he said, "Petty Officer James, do you play guitar?" And I said, "I used to when I was younger." And he said, you should think about taking that back up." And I just thought it was bizarre that this guy introduced me to his daughter and asked me, like, kind of knew I played guitar for some reason, or I used to. And I remember, one time we were drinking in the bar and I was hanging out with all the Satanists. They were like British Army. And they were acting really like they were on speed, like they were on coke or something. They were talking a mile a minute, and they were all kind of together in a big group. And I said, "What are you guys talking about?" I said, "What's wrong with you guys? What are you on?" And the goon said, "We're on chrome, man. We're on chrome." And I said, "What's chrome?" He goes, "Adrenochrome. You get it from kids." And they were just all like together and like talking like chipmunks. It's really high pitched and speaking very quickly. And so I didn't know what they were talking about. I just kind of blew it off. And there were just several events like that, just strange things. One guy took me, the same one who said, "Congratulations, you made it back." Before he left the command, he said, "I want you to come to my room. I want to talk to you." And I walked with him, and we went to his room. I sat down. He said, "You joined something called the Secret Space Program. You don't remember that?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Michael Aquino tortured you for 2 days, and all these people who are acting like they're your friends who work the underground base, they all know it." And he said, "Doesn't that piss you off that all these people they're acting like they're your friend, and none of them are telling you what happened to you?" I said, "Well, I don't remember any of that." He said, "None of the people you work with in the garage, they don't know about it, but everybody who works in the underground base knows about it." And So I was getting into trouble. You know, there's something wrong with me. I went into a deep depression when I got back. I was horrible, and I started taking antidepressants, which I never did before in my life. I started drinking. You know, I was getting into trouble, and so I was going to get out of the Navy. There was just something wrong. I couldn't figure it out.